Good afternoon. I'm going to call to order today's meeting of the Senate Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Daley. Here. Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Krasner. Here. Senator Steinbeck. Here. Chair Orenshaw.
Present. And please mark Majority Leader Cannizzaro present when she arrives, or absent excused if she's not able to join us today. We do have a quorum. I'd like to provide some general housekeeping measures. Please ask everyone to silence their electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table by the door and provide a business card, if any, to the committee secretary. For those joining online, please be sure to mute your microphone when you're not speaking to minimize any background noise. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name and affiliation with any groups for the record. Then please turn the microphone off when you're done speaking. Handouts. We ask that for 20 paper copies for members of the public. Electronic copies should have been submitted in PDF form to our committee manager 24 hours in advance of the committee meeting. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting, even if we don't agree with someone else's position. Committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other documents. Please do not view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. As a reminder, we may take agenda items out of order. Public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting. Each person who wishes to make public comment will be limited to 2 minutes per speaker. Today, we only have one item. We have a bill to hear, Senate Bill 226. This is an exempt measure that was declared exempt here. However, it's not exempt from the deadline of sine die. That's why I was hoping we could hear it today. And I would like to hand the gavel over to Vice Chair Daley to start the hearing on Senate Bill 226.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll wait for you to get down there and we'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 226.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Daley, members of the Senate Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections. For the record, James Orenshaw, I represent State Senate District 21 down in southern Nevada. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present Senate Bill 226 before you today. This bill revises provisions relating to legislative affairs, specifically the legislature's interim activities. The bill before you today came out of a recommendation from the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections. I had the pleasure to be the chair of that interim committee alongside Senator Daley and Senator Krasner. I'd like to begin with a brief background that explains what led to this recommendation. As you are all aware, the Nevada Legislature is constitutionally limited to 120 days per session, a regular session, every odd number year. However, during the interim period between legislative sessions, interim committees of the legislature still meet to study certain issues and formulate recommendations for new legislation to be considered during the next regular legislative session. During the 2021 session, the legislature passed Assembly Bill 443, which significantly changed the interim committee structure of the legislature. The bill repealed several existing statutory interim committees and formed new joint interim standing committees that parallel the issue areas of the committees that meet during session. For example, there's a joint interim standing committee on legislative operations and elections, which voted to draft the bill that we're hearing today. Senate Bill 226 also imposed, Assembly Bill 443 of the last session also imposed new requirements, in particular those regarding membership, quorum, and oversight by the Legislative Commission for the joint interim standing committees that differed from those of prior interim committees. The 2021 to 2022 and 2023 to 2024 interims were the first interims the legislature was operating under this new interim structure. And as such, there were a few lessons learned and necessary changes identified to improve the process. Senate Bill 226 seeks to address a few oversights of Assembly Bill 443 that were not discovered until the first interim of implementation and incorporates a few other changes to interim activities in general. In many respects, Senate Bill 226 really tries to tie up some of the loose ends and really make things run a little bit smoother. With your permission, Vice Chair Daley, I'd like to go over some of the sections of the bill.
Please.
Thank you, Vice Chair. The bill makes several changes to the interim committee structure of the legislature, including clarifying that in the vacancy of a chair for a joint interim standing committee, the vice chair shall become acting chair until the chair is appointed, clarifying that if a regular member of a joint interim standing committee cannot attend a meeting, the alternate member that attends in the member's place must be of the same political party, transferring the duties to evaluate and review issues relating to governmental purchasing from the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Government Affairs pursuant to NRS 218E.330, which provides that a Joint Interim Standing Committee may evaluate and review issues within the jurisdiction of its corresponding standing committee. And governmental purchasing has typically fallen under the jurisdiction of the Senate and Assembly Committees on Government Affairs. However, Assembly Bill 443 had a specific carve-out to allow the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections to evaluate and review issues related to governmental purchasing. This bill instead transfers these duties to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Government Affairs, where I believe they more appropriately belong. In a similar manner, Assembly Bill 443 required the Commission to Study Governmental Purchasing, commonly known as the Nevada Public Purchasing Study Commission, to submit a report including recommendations for legislation relating to governmental purchasing to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections. Senate Bill 226 instead requires, more appropriately, I believe, that this report be submitted to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Government Affairs. Senate Bill 226 also repeals the requirement that the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services review regulations related to health care. This requirement, I believe, is outdated and redundant. Before, the Legislative Commission had the authority to approve regulations, and the Legislative Committee on Health Care would review regulations relating to health care. The Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services took over this duty when the Legislative Committee on Health Care was repealed. However, now that the Legislative Commission approves regulations, I believe it's unnecessary for the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services to also review regulations related to health care. Additionally, no other Joint Interim Standing Committee has a requirement to review regulations. I believe it's time that this outdated part of the statute is removed. Senate Bill 226 requires certain reports to be submitted to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on the Judiciary and transfer certain duties relating to industrial programs from the Joint Interim Standing Committee on the Judiciary to the Interim Finance Committee. Assembly Bill 443 of the 2021 legislative session repealed the Committee on Industrial Programs and transferred those duties to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on the Judiciary. However, several of these duties are fiscal in nature and are better suited for the Interim Finance Committee. And Committee on Industrial Programs is a committee I served on in the past during the interim, and I chaired, and it oversaw what Silver State Industries, prison industries, and it was a subcommittee of the Interim Finance Committee. And I was very fortunate to serve on that and to chair that, but that's kind of what that committee is if you're not familiar with that one. Senate Bill 226 also revises the meeting timelines for the Joint Interim Standing Committees. The bill requires the Legislative Commission to appoint members and alternate members of each Joint Interim Standing Committee by August 31st for each regular legislative session and authorizes such committees to begin meeting on September 1st of that year. This will give committees greater flexibility, I believe, in choosing meeting dates and provide more time for committees to meet throughout the interim. Furthermore, Senate Bill 226 makes a few procedural changes to the operations of the Joint Interim Standing Committees. Any proposed recommended legislation must be approved by, in this part here, I would like to let committee members know, if you look at the amendment, the part of the bill that came from the veto bill last session would have required, and the original text of Senate Bill 226 requires just a simple majority of the members. However, my amendment that I'm proposing, conceptual amendment, which should be on Nellis and members should have a copy, would require a majority of both the Assembly members of the committee and the Senate members in terms of any action. So that would be amended out of the bill if my conceptual amendment is added. And I believe that addresses some concern that some other members had expressed to me. Senate Bill 226, again, made some big changes to the Subcommittee on Public Lands. And members, if you look at the amendment that's on Nellis, and you should have a paper copy of the amendment, my proposal is to actually make the Subcommittee on Public Lands a full interim committee and to divide up the bill draft requests, because under the current structure, I believe the Subcommittee on Public Lands makes 4 recommendations for bill draft requests to the Interim Natural Resources Committee. So my proposal in the conceptual amendment was that the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Natural Resources would keep the 10 that they have, and that the Subcommittee on Public Lands would keep the 4 that they would have, but it would be an independent Joint Interim Standing Committee appointed by the Legislative Commission rather than by the chair of the Natural Resources Interim Committee. So that is part of the conceptual amendment, and I believe that addresses some of the concerns that were expressed to me by members. So that there, I'd ask the committee to look to the conceptual amendment rather than the text of the bill as to the Public Lands Committee, because I have there through the amendment tried to address some concerns that were brought to me by other members. Additionally, Senate Bill 226 makes changes to help update and streamline the operations of some other longstanding interim committees that were not affected by Assembly Bill 443 of the 2021 legislative session, including the Legislative Committee for the Review and Oversight of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and the Marlette Lake Water System, the Legislative Committee on Senior Citizens, Veterans, and Adults with Special Needs. This bill aligns the membership requirements and procedures related to the election of the chair and vice chair, vacancies, meetings, quorums, compensation, and expenses of those committees with those of various joint interim standing committees. In addition, Senate Bill 226 renames the Sunset Subcommittee of the Legislative Commission as the Sunset Committee of the Legislature and makes the committee independent of the Legislative Commission. The bill applies the same membership requirements and procedures related to the election of the chair and vice chair, vacancies, meetings, quorums, compensation, and expenses as the various other joint interim standing committees. With this change, the Sunset Committee will have more time, I believe, to review boards and commissions and will be able to submit its own recommendations for legislation rather than submitting them to the Legislative Commission for approval. The bill also makes changes to provisions related to legislative committee members and staff regulated by the Nevada Lobbying Disclosure and Regulation Act and the Nevada Financial Disclosure Act, so that legislative committee staff members may attend educational meetings, events, or trips that are organized for the committee. Senate Bill 226 revises the date that a teacher who wishes to serve on the Nevada State Teacher and Education Support Professional Recruitment and Retention Advisory Task Force must submit an application to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Education from January 15th of an even-numbered year to December 1st of an odd-numbered year. This would give the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Education the additional time it needs to appoint members to the task force by February 1st of each even-numbered year. Finally, the bill revises the dates by which the State Board of Education must submit and the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Education must review a report relating to the instruction of the Holocaust and other genocides. It also removes the requirement for certain hospitals to submit a staffing committee report to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services and the Director of the Legislative Council Bureau, which according to the Nevada Hospital Association is a duplicative effort to ensure compliance with its staffing committee requirements. Again, I'd ask members to look at the amendment I've submitted. I am certainly open to any other ideas for amendments that might address concerns members have or any thoughts as to how to make the interim structure of the legislature more efficient and better serve our constituents. With that, Vice Chair Daley, I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Committee, any questions? No questions? All right, I have a couple. So on the, and I follow the amendment, I know you and I talked about this bill earlier, various things. So on the public lands, formerly the subcommittee, all of the other interim committees, if you're trying to make it a full committee, have 8 legislative members. So I see you're proposing to have 2, 1 local government. I guess it can be from anywhere. Legislative Commission is going to pick that person, I suppose, if we can find someone to volunteer, and then someone from a tribal government somewhere in the state. Are you intending to have those 2 members be voting members on that committee?
James Orenshaw, Senate District 21. Thank you, Vice Chair Daley, for the question. My intention was that they would be voting members. I based that structure on the current subcommittee on public lands and also trying to look back at the prior committee before AB 443 of the 2021 session when we did have that standalone subcommittee on public lands, because we had the county commissioner, and I don't recall whether there was a tribal representative in the way that committee was structured, but my intent would be that they would be voting members.
Were they voting members at that time?
I'm not sure of the answer to that question. I might need to
Legal person here, but.
might need to get back to you on that.
Yeah, and I mean, if they were before, then it's obviously legal to do it now. If they were just, because I know like the Sunset Subcommittee had theoretically advisory people that were supposed to be appointed by the governor. He didn't appoint them. They were non-voting members, though. They were just, could give advice and ask questions and stuff like that, but they were non-voting members. So I didn't know if those were non-voting or not, or if it was, and if they are, a couple of, just a thought, I don't know what it said before. Obviously, legislators are covered, and you have language in there about the per diem and whatever they're able to get. I don't know if that would cover those other 2 people, or if, unless they're already paid for their people, do you have to have the language that says they, you know, obviously if they're elected and the tribal members are going to get time off to go to these meetings. I don't know if you have to cover it. And then moving the 4 additional requests over to the Public Lands Committee, so they would only end up with 4.
That's correct, James
draft
Ornschall,
drafts.
Senate 21. Currently, they have 4 recommendations they make to the Interim Natural Resources Committee that I believe must be regarding public lands issues. So here, they would have those 4. That's the way I, in my conceptual amendment, thought about dividing it up, kind of paralleling what's in law now, but elevating it from a subcommittee to an interim standing committee, joint interim standing committee, and basically dividing up the BDRs, letting interim natural resources keep the 10 that they have, and then giving those 4 on public lands to this.
Understood, and I was just checking on it again, because the Health and Human Services Committee, all of the standing committees get 10. And then the Health and Human Services Committee would get 5 additional, Judiciary got 5 additional, and Public Lands, because of the subcommittee, would have gotten 4 additional. So now you're just transferring that over, so I think I understand that, so.
Thank you for the questions, I appreciate it. And again, any suggestions any member has or other members of our chamber on ways to improve the bill, certainly I'd like to try to find consensus if possible on this.
No, and I don't have any other questions, still none? Still none.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks.
Going easy on me, committee, very kind of you.
With that, we'll have you step back, and is there anybody here or in Las Vegas that wants to give support testimony on SB 226? Seeing no one come forward, broadcast, do we have anybody on the phones, or do we have the phones?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, you do have the phones. The public line is open and working, and we have no callers at this time.
Perfect. Do we have anybody in opposition? Seeing none, broadcast, anybody miraculously call in the last 30 seconds?
The public line is still open and working, and we have no callers at this time.
Okay, seeing no one here, we will move to neutral testimony on Senate Bill 226. Seeing nobody come forward, and we have an empty room in Las Vegas. Broadcast, you're up again.
Chair, we have had no callers join at this time.
Thank you. So at that point, unless you want to come up and give any closing statements.
Vice Chair Daley, members of the committee, James Ornschall, Senate 21. Thank you for hearing Senate Bill 226. I appreciate the committee's time. I know it's late in the session, and this is a bill that, because it was exempt, wasn't super urgent to hear it before the earlier deadlines. But I believe that there's the potential here to improve the process of the interim for our constituents, for the legislature, in terms of being able to craft legislation for the next session. So appreciate the committee's time. And again, I'm open to any other suggestions for amendments. Thank you.
Maurice, thank you. You got a couple of technical questions. Ask legal. They'll get it drafted for you if we even need it. So that was it. So with that, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 226 and the gavel back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Daley. Thank you, members. Last item on our agenda is public comment. Anybody wishes to make public comment, either in Carson City or down in Las Vegas? No one's coming forward in Carson City. I don't see anyone in Las Vegas broadcasting. Anyone on the phone lines who wishes to make public comment?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working, and we have no callers at this time.
Members, I appreciate your flexibility. Thank you for coming on such short notice. The call of the chair. We may have a few more meetings before signing die that are like that. Call of the chair where we'll try to notify everybody as quickly as we can, but we may not have a ton of time. So I appreciate everybody watching their phones. Thank you. And thank you to our staff for getting this together on such short notice. And with that, we are adjourned.